Like if you work at a place like the World Bank, there's a little bit of both. In the federal government in Canada, there's very structured. And if you work, of course, at a university, it's much more relaxed. When you work in places like the UN, there's the headquarters part of the work, but there's also the field part. Diplomats have the highest rates of divorce, followed close by dentists and a few others. Originally, your source country, things have also changed. Well, Canada has moved on. There's a lot of things that have changed. When I was younger, I did gymnastics. That was my sport. The first Royal Commission on the conditions in the Foreign Service was back in 1981. Okay, so 50 years on, the same fundamental structural issues remain. I think it's from the time when, diplomats were also basically considered to be rich men who took diplomacy as a sport. One source of income has to feed four mouths in a place like this. The cost of living is extraordinarily high. Look, of course, not everything is bad. It's a privilege to serve your country.
Hi, welcome back to Rooted and Routed podcast. My name is Sabiya and I'm back with a guest that I'm truly humbled and grateful to have. Okay, he's worked, he's worked in international diplomacy, global education, and policy design, and held roles from UN specialist to hosting a radio show in LA to academic mentor to a diplomat spouse. He's lived in 10 countries. His name is Carlos Ruano. Hi, Carlos.
Hi, Sabiya. Very nice to be here.
I'm glad that we're doing this. And I'm not too sure if I covered or if I missed something from your background. It is so much. And I'm sure maybe there's something that you would like to add about your background.
Well, we'll find that as we speak, because there probably is going to come certain times in my life where I'm going to go back to other parts of my life that maybe no biography can touch them all. So maybe as we speak, maybe other things will sort of come to the front.
Absolutely. Let me start with the first question that I have is, you've worked inside public systems at entry level, national, international, and academic. How do you anchor your role and the level of agencies, the location that keeps on shifting?
Well, I grew up in Guatemala City, and at that time, it had a very large earthquake had happened. We're talking 1970s when I was quite young, and that leveled the entire city. So it really changed. One day you were just a regular kind of young person growing up, and then the next day things had pretty much collapsed around you. So that sort of put a new meaning to what life meant, and it required to really answer questions that normally you're not expected to answer until you grow up. And we were all forced to confront that issue of our own mortality, really, and what was our place in what we call life. Like, what were we going to do? You had a lot of people who were planning on doing all kinds of things the night before, and they're all gone the next day. So that really was the original tipping point in my life, if you like. And so pretty much anything that happened after that, I measure against that tipping point. So it's been easy for me to adapt to new situations when I think about just how things can switch from one moment to the next. So where you ground yourself is not really in places or people or moments, but you ground yourself in what is that you can contribute.
Yeah.
How can you really be helpful or useful? Sometimes how am I not being helpful or useful? To be also honest enough to understand that maybe this is not the right place for me, or the right role, or the right circumstance. And so face that as well. So I always relate to everything I do. And you'll see that throughout my careers. What connects it is the idea of finding something where I can be of service or I can be useful. Mm-hmm. And preferably if I can learn as well, that's icing on the cake. A lot of times you are able to learn lots of different experiences and learning from people. Sometimes you're not. But if you put all those three things together, the learning, the understanding of your vocation, what input drives you, and the understanding of your own fragility in relation to the larger scheme of things, that's how I ground all the things that I've done.
And was it difficult for you sometimes to adapt, or you kind of get used to it as you move on so frequently?
There's always a point where it's what I call a process of conversion. Like, how people convert to new beliefs sometimes, or they join a new family when they marry into a different kind of family and they have to move to another community. There is a moment where you are in your previous state, and then there's a moment where you're in the sort of liminality, where you're neither here nor there, and you sort of feel that you are between worlds. And then there's the other moment where you step into your new environment, if you like. It's when you're at that moment in the liminal part of things, in between, where all that grounding helps you, because you see a lot of new signs, a lot of new things that are coming at you. Some of them you will understand, some of them you won't. And then instead of trying to rationalize it or trying to compare it with what I had before, I try to sort of look at them as, the ocean. If you try to resist the ocean, it's going to hit you and it's going to throw you away. So if you look sideways, the ocean will go, and you still get fresh with the water, but you won't get hurt or displaced. So I see that as a wave of change that's coming, and I don't try to embrace it. I let it come to me, all these changes, and then instead of trying to avoid it, I just try to find the angle, the way in which I can address them. In some cultures, that angle might mean that you have to step back and be quiet and listen carefully around. In some other cultures, might mean that you have to be a more active participant, whether it's a work culture or a society or just a new locality. All of these places, all of these elements have their own ways. And mastering those ways, sometimes you can do it rapidly, sometimes it takes a long time. And you need to be prepared to have that expectation that the unexpected will come at you. And with that, it's easier to see adaptation as an understanding of the unexpected and as an understanding of your possibilities, because you're also bringing something.
Yes.
It's a two-way street. It's not just things coming at you, but also you are modifying that environment with your presence. Even if you don't speak, or just your arrival represents a kind of change for that environment as well.
I think it's to do with the self-awareness. The more self-aware you are, I think then you can in some way find a way and navigate better, because this is something that you're aware of, familiar, and this is something quite foreign. So if you're aware of it, then this can be maybe easy to adapt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you've lived in 10 countries and held roles across diplomacy, education, policy. When people ask, so what do you do? What do you tell them?
Depends on if they're asking me about my life in general or my job, right? If they sometimes the question is loaded, right? They really want to know what you're doing in terms of your life, not necessarily in terms of your career. And sometimes it's just your career. But when they ask me in terms of, when I know that the question is about my life and not about my career, I say I'm trying to live the best life I can with the tools that I have, and making sure that those tools are always put in the service of something that I think is worth pursuing. So that's what I tell them. So I don't tell them I do this, because a lot of times, we confuse what we do with who we are, right? We confuse our jobs with who we are. So people tell you, okay, what do you do, Carlos? And they're, oh, well, my job is, no. That's not you. That's what you do. It's this difference between cooking and eating, right? It's like, okay, what are you cooking? It's very different than what are you eating. So maybe they're all food, but it's not the same. And when I tell them about professional roles, I just say to them that my role has always been in the area of education, in terms of mentoring people, in terms of understanding what the various stages of a well-rounded mind can do to change society. Education as a force for change, but education also as a force for development of countries, of societies. So I do that in that sense, and to that I add my policy side, which is you have to understand the bigger picture. Policy is all about bigger pictures. It's not so much about the details, but it's always about thinking about the forest. How is that supposed to look like? What is it that we want to do at the end of the day? In other words, where are we going? So if you think about another maritime analogy, I will put education as my boat, and the policy will be the sail. So I put the sail where I want to go, and that's that impact of the things that I do long term. That's the policy, and that's the aspect that I always keep in mind with every specific activity that I develop, whether it is as an advisor or as a specialist or simply as a mentor in other contexts. That's always my guiding star is what do we want to do at the end of the day? What is it? What does it matter? Like, what's the importance of this? Okay, so I do this. So what? What does it represent to in people's lives? What you're doing? Where do you actually want to see this in the final stage? So those are the ways in which I describe what I do. And then when they ask me, okay, what's your role? Well, I have several roles, as you mentioned. I had the traditional role of the specialist, which was basically a technical expert on systems and specific ways of administrative behaviors that happens only in school settings. I have the role of the academic researcher, which I have basically studied the relationship between nutritional outcomes and learning outcomes and programs to allow young people to achieve in school with certain incentives. I have done things in regards to education finance, things about how people learn, why they learn, the sociology of learning, how is that distributed in a society? Because as you know, learning is power. And so if it's not distributed properly, then there will be consequences long term. And lately, during the pandemic, I discovered that information management had a big impact because there were a lot of different kinds of information. Some of them was disinformation, others were actually more relevant information, but a lot of things were flying around, and I wanted to understand how that sort of information systems management also impact the ability of people to learn. So I went back to school during the pandemic and got a master's in information science, and I tried to learn the principles behind how information is absorbed and how information is used when we learn, and how we can particularly help young people who are surrounded by all this information to learn to properly navigate that and not to be confused, not to think that just because it's technologically possible, that makes it automatically true. Or because it's technologically acceptable, that also makes it automatically ethically acceptable. So I'm working now in that intersection between values, the power of information management forces, and the learning ability of young people, which includes also the ability to understand what their privacy rights are. In other words, people nowadays, as you know, put a lot of information about themselves, and the younger they are, the more they put out on themselves. And I'm trying to bring that discussion to how young people can preserve their own privacy in an age where privacy is not really valued by the electronic platforms. So that they learn to distinguish between their own intimate space and the spaces beyond. So that's how I ended up working at my current position is at the Faculty of Theology at Copenhagen University, where they address at the Center of Privacy Rights. They address a number of issues of societal, technological, economical, using the lens of what it means to have privacy in the 21st century.
Wow. But you know what? One thing is true that when people say, what do you do? Right? Sometimes it is always thinking about the career. But yesterday I was watching a TEDx speaker talking about the identity, and it's quite layered. You're not just, let's say, in your case, let's say a professor, a faculty of theology, right? You're not just that. You are a partner. You're also somebody who's worked on some really important projects. And for some reason, you were there, right? So the identity is quite layered and complex, but I don't think so. People really sometimes think of that. They really look at the career part and
And sometimes people define themselves by what they perceive to be their failures. Like sometimes when people introduce themselves as, "Hi, I'm the worst father too." Like, what does that got to do with anything? Well, it means that that person considers that that event is sufficient enough to define the rest of his life. So sometimes that happens. We internalize certain things as failure, and therefore that will brand our faces or the rest of our existence as nothing but the result of that failure.
yeah. Yeah. Well, you know what? I have a question in this question. Uh, when you work on certain projects to study the outcomes, how do you select that? Okay, this is the project that I would like to work on. Is it that you decide, you get to decide, or is it something that you are just assigned and okay, that's how then you have to you're assigned because of your background, your experience?
It really depends on where you work. Like if you work at a place like the World Bank, there's a little bit of both. You do have, because I was a tax manager, so you do have that ability to look for certain areas of interest. And then you also get a package of tasks that are assigned to you as part of your work package. So there's a bit of both in that kind of environment. But in other places, if you go, for instance, in the federal government in Canada, there's very structure, and you are basically assigned a number of files, and you work with those files, and your job is basically to see them through from inception to conclusion. And if you work, of course, at a university, it's much more relaxed. You get autonomy to do certain things within your research area, but you also get to engage with a whole bunch of other actors or stakeholders that normally you wouldn't be able to do in other circumstances, because you're really exchanging ideas, exchanging knowledge. So that allows you to create a different kind of partnerships and a different kind of alliances with other people that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do in the settings. But understand also that when you work in places like the UN, there's the headquarters part of the work, but there's also the field part. And the field part can have a much broader scope of actions than the headquarters part. So in the field, I could probably have, let's say within the area of learning outcomes of nutrition interventions, I could choose to engage multiple departments and multiple localities to address this problem from a broader perspective than if I was just a headquarters-based employee where I was just trying to understand the dynamics and I was just trying to describe it or analyze them, because as a headquarters person, I do not have the kind of discretionary margin of engagement that I will have as a field manager. So when you are in organizations that have those components, the same thing when you are in the Canadian Foreign Service, you have a certain margin on the field that will normally not be available to you if you were at a headquarters-based position. So you need to work within the confines of the bureaucratic structures that you are given, and also, if you are that kind of person, constantly push the envelope to see things in innovative ways. I mean, just because you're a part of a bureaucracy, just because you have regulations, does not mean that you cannot be creative or find some ways to innovate. There are ways in which you have to do it, but to do that, you have to be able, to bring it back to the earlier conversation, to adapt to local conditions. So you understand what the local conditions are like, what you can do within those local parameters, and what you bring with you. And hopefully that mixture, you allow yourself the possibility of finding new ways of blending what you find on site with what you bring with yourself. And some of those can be very innovative, especially if you involve people at different levels. If you have that constant dialogue with people and you're willing to have your assumptions challenged and questioned, then you can really come up with ideas that are innovative, that are meaningful, that are impactful, and that are not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but rather providing really a new insight into how things can be done and bringing significant improvements as well.
This is quite interesting because an opportunity where you work on a project which you like and something that is also impactful and meaningful. Yeah, not everybody gets a chance to do something like that, you know.
Oh no, and let's face it, some of the work in any job is stuff that we don't like to do. There's a certain percent in every job that we have, even people who are business owners. There's a part of the business that they don't particularly like, but they have to do it. So we need to take that as well. And sometimes that requires us facing what's exactly about this part that I don't like. So in my case, let's say one of the things I don't like is to look at spreadsheets because it's just I don't have the eyesight and there's a lot of lines and I have to make sense of them. And I have to understand, okay, this line means this much, this line is that much. Well, I may not like it. I may find it not necessarily to my taste, but if this is something that will contribute to getting the things I like done, then I better learn that. Not because I enjoy it, but because it's a necessary step.
Yes.
We know the old saying, there are no roses without thorns, right? So sometimes you try to reach a rose and you get pinched by the thorn, right? Well, every job has the roses and it has its own thorns as well. So it's up to us to understand when there's a thorn there, and you need to be aware of that. Like you said, you need to maintain that awareness and know that they're not going away. If you want your rose, you're going to have to go through that sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I think sometimes it's just difficult to accept it. Sometimes people are like, okay, I want to do the work that I love, but not the one that I have to do necessarily.
Yeah. I notice as I get more experience in my years of my career, I notice that I have learned to not to accept or to resign myself to these kinds of issues, but to put it in a sharper perspective. I can place the difficulties within the larger context. So I'm able to use only the minimal amount of effort that I need to do that, rather than trying to hit my head against the wall and trying to change that or saying, I hate this or I don't like it, what do I do? So instead of seeing that, I'm trying to find ways of understanding and, if possible, working with or around them, but not really allowing those aspects to color everything else I do. Yeah. So it gets easier now than before.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, from your work, maybe shifting a little bit to your personal life, you've experienced both as expat, as diplomat, and now as a diplomatic spouse, the trailing spouse. How has that shift in roles influenced you?
Well, that's normal. I think if you are married to a foreign service officer, it's kind of expected at some point you will be the stay-at-home or the trailing spouse, as they call it. In my case, I've been very fortunate in that even when I'm like trailing, like right now, for instance, quote unquote, I'm still have a career and a very fruitful career at that, even though I'm not officially employed. And I had to take a leave of absence from my previous position. So I'm a little atypical in that way. Other people have children to raise, and they spend a lot of the energy doing that. Other people trying to reinvent themselves along and try to find ways in which they can create their own identity. For me, that's never been an issue. I always see these points where I'm following my wife as a opportunity to grow, rather than a pause or a break in my career. So it goes back to understanding what my role is. It's understanding also that life is not always about me or being the center of things. That you sometimes, and hopefully more than sometimes, we by being of service and being willing to step back and change a little bit of your trajectory will be in the long term very beneficial for your relationship. You don't have to be married; it could be your long term partner, or you could be your parents if you are a diplomatic child or whatever. It could be other kinds of equally important relationships. So you kind of need to look at that as well. What is it that you're willing to put in, and what is that you're willing not to put in. And I say that sometimes being self-centered is quite useful and necessary, and sometimes you have to step away from that self-centeredness and understand that other people also have a place in your life. And in this case, well, this is the time for me to step back, and by stepping back, contributing to the success of the posting and contributing to the well-being of the family, then so be it. Let's do this. And so for me, that has been always the guiding principle. Is it something that contributes to this sort of overall well-being, or is it something that is a detriment to that? And if it's the latter, then you have to reevaluate things. But up to now, I've been fortunate that I always was able to get something more positive out of me being, if you like, on a different level, in the background, if you like, of a relationship, because I'm not at all the principal, but that means that I have to learn to embrace other aspects of my life. And doing, for instance, this kind of conversation with you is part of that, because I had never done this sort of self-reflection before, and this opportunity with you allows me the chance to put these pieces and ask internally myself, was it worth it? And I always say, yeah, it is worth it, because it comes from your heart. It doesn't come from your wallet. So the moment you start to monetize your interests, that's kind of game over for me, because that's not really what my emphasis is. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but when you live in transaction culture such as this one here in Singapore, where everything is transaction based, and where pretty much everything has a monetary value associated with it, well, it might be very good in that sense for the context of this society, but it may not be necessarily good for me. So I need to understand again, adapting the local, understanding it, seeing the difference for what it is, and I'm moving on. So that's how I feel that being my connection to my role, or my quote unquote identity as a trailing spouse. And I like the trailing part in the sense that you're leaving something behind. You're not just taking, so you are also leaving something as you in your wake, kind of thing. And hopefully that which I'm leaving behind me would also be beneficial as well.
Yeah. I think, but like the trailing spouse that we have heard all this time on my podcast, they've always had this, as you said, something that you're leaving behind, but most of them are not necessarily happy with what they have to leave.
No.
And it does, to some extent, impact their identity. There's a lot.
I've seen that. Look, I mean, diplomats have the highest rates of divorce in all the professions.
Heard that? Yeah.
Followed close by dentists and a few others. So, I mean, it's unfortunately the lack of appropriate mechanisms on the part of the employer to provide spouses with spaces for them to develop their own careers is a huge component of marriage breakdown, because people are not just there to raise children. People are not just there to be, the backdrop to an employee. People are not just there as a sort of an addendum to your spouse. You have your own identity, you have your own life, but if that's not allowed to be manifested, then people are going to go somewhere else where they can do that. Mm-hmm. And so the constant grading of not being able to transfer your skills, of using your skills into a career-related role in certain cultures, maybe not in others, but in some cultures, it's really a slow death of the person's identity, and that's something that leads to irreparable damage. Particularly if the employer is not flexible, if the employee fails to understand these dynamics, or if the spouse also fails to understand these dynamics, then people will drift apart quickly and inevitably, and that will lead to breakups and decisions that need to be made. And this involves oftentimes that people will leave, and some people the employee may stay in the post. Sometimes the employee might return, but it definitely represents a huge cost for everybody because it costs a lot of money to train somebody to be sent overseas, only to have them return after a few years of service. And it costs a lot of our pain and anxiety when there is a marital breakup under any circumstance. But when you are in a country that is not your own or a society that you consider yourself not to be familiar with, and then you're forced to break up all ties and go back to where you were originally from, even though in that original your source country, things have also changed so that when you land there, they're not the same at all.
It's true.
And then, let's say I was to leave, let's say this posting and say to, my wife, okay, I had it, I'm moving, I'm back, I'm leaving, bye. Well, Canada has moved on. There's a lot of things that have changed. The people I used to know and who might have been friends or acquaintances, they may be there, they may not be there. They may not even want to talk to me after some time. They may see me as a reminder of things that go bad because I had to separate. I had to get a divorce. So they may see me as a bad omen, right? I said, well, maybe I shouldn't hang out with this guy because he couldn't keep it together. So all of those issues that impact your image, your self-perception, and your perception of self-worth, it get magnified multiple times when you go back to a place that you're no longer able to recognize. Yeah. So it takes you back to, if recall what I mentioned about the liminality aspect, where you're in between worlds. And so you go back to a place where you're really in between worlds, and if you're not careful, you will stay there in the between worlds for the rest of your life. Now, if you are, let's say, in a profession that requires you to be in that sort of environment, I don't know, like a tour guide or something, someone who goes back and forth, that might be great to have. But if you want to develop some kind of stability, then having that sort of permanent status of not really being in one way or the other, but having one foot in one area, one foot in the other, that will cause further injury, further loss of identity, and in the end, it just makes you feel even in more strong terms. Whatever difficulties you have become even larger than they would otherwise be the case. So you got to be careful with that as well, because it's not what you left, as you said, is also modifying constantly. And where we are now, we might be in the same world, but at the speed at which things move in different places is different. The way the things are here is quite different from the way in which they are in Japan, or which they are in Vancouver, or which they might be in Congo. So if we're not cognizant of those forces, and many people are not, then they're going to have very, very difficult time readjusting and re-entering.
I think in this, what I also noticed, that there are two types of people who are really into it, of traveling, moving often and changing their locations and maybe changing their roles and changing the whole lifestyle. They're happy with that. And they are happy to call themselves as global citizens, literally. Mm-hmm. People hashtag global citizens, right? And there are certain people who really, I think in a couple, there would be one who is more leaning towards stability, and there's one who is more, okay, I want to try some exciting assignments, exciting locations, maybe give my kids an exposure, which is something we wouldn't have done being local. So then, of course, there is the consequences, as you said, they drift apart. But the couples who are really in sync and they both want, okay, let's try something new for a couple of years and come back home. And of course, when you come back home, the home is not home. It has really progressed, evolved in a way that you did not expect it to. Like in my case, right? I have been away from India and then coming back to India, and then it's hard to accept, okay, this is India. Because the way I grew up in my own country was quite different, and it takes a bit of time to adjust to the whole pace, which is again faster, different than what I used to. The people around also have evolved, and then you start to really feel, oh my God, how do I enter into this social circle? Because it doesn't seem to be familiar to me now. It's quite foreign. But yeah, I think there are two kinds of people, I think. So personalities who are really into, how do I say, extrovert, who are really always looking for exciting opportunities abroad, and the ones who are more, okay, grounded, want to be stable. So then they have the difficulties, as you say.
You notice that a lot with the children of diplomats. There's those two types you were mentioning are quite marked. There's the kids who do not want to ever move after the rotational cycle is finished. They turn 18 or 17. Well, as soon as they become of age, they want to go back to the source country and they never move again, never again. And then there are the others who want to follow their parents as long as possible and who themselves will end up probably with a high degree of probability also as a diplomat going from country to country because this is the kind of experience in which they feel themselves comfortable. I'm not sure that it's an issue being introvert or extrovert. I think it's an issue more in terms of the kind of how perceptions they have of the family environment. For a person who is adaptable, you are in the middle of the ocean and there are high seas and there are waves. You think of that as okay. Look, we have to adjust our sails and we have to, but it's okay. We're on the boat, no problem. For a person who's not adaptable, then the sea starts to swell, and the person doesn't know what to do with the sails, doesn't know what their role is in this with the crew or the family, if you like, and then they only see confusion and chaos around them. They see moving from country to country as yet another situation of chaos and confusion. They see arriving into another country as yet another challenge in full of chaos and confusion and things constantly changing. And so for this other personality who cannot see the opportunity to take charge of your sales, to redirect where you want to go, they see that more as the recipients of all these events. So they only get the water splash, the wind howling, and they don't see the idea of, well, we're trying to get this boat to where we want to go. There's a bit of a rough patch, but we know how to deal with that. They don't see that. The how to deal with that part is much weaker. And so whether you're an extrovert or introvert may not be the issue. It's more an issue of how they see themselves at the end of the day. And if they associate that with periods of strain and stress with the parents, then for many of those kids, they are the ones that will go home as soon as they turn 16 or 17 or 18, say, I'm never moving again, and you people do whatever you want. And then there are the others who would say, yeah, let's keep doing this because this is fun. So there's a bit of extreme in that. I have never met a diplomat in my years, even in all the institutions I worked, be the UN or the bank or the government of Canada. I never met a kid that has a bit of both. They're either one end or the other. And years later, I see them, the ones that more geared towards that sort of quick decision making, rapid change. I see them also in the footsteps of their parents, because again, it's the type of situation where the unexpected is the rule, when you have to learn to expect the unexpected. And if you're okay with that, then you're going to really develop a completely different sense of who you are than if I am the kind of person that the unexpected means chaos, means confusion, means fear, means that something is going to happen to me, and also means loss of control. Yeah. So if I'm in that latter group, it's very hard for those kinds of children to develop, even though they have access to the same high-level schools, high-level counseling services. They get access to everything else that they can have. That's not going to change. That fear, that loss of control, that insecurity, that sense of chaos and confusion will never leave them.
Do you believe that when you have access to such exposure frequently, do you think that, okay, some trailing spouses take it in a much positive way, and because they get the perspective side, the multicultural perspectives. And with that, what do you do? What I have seen around a couple of diplomat spouses, they have become a speaker. They have written books about what they have learned from different cultures. So there is a possibility that you can, in fact, evolve into uh, a life which you did not expect it to. But some people who are not adaptable, as you said, will indeed find themselves in a space where, okay, they just want to be more stable and permanent. And yeah.
See, where I disagree with most people who do research in this area is that I think adaptability can be taught, that you can learn to be adaptable. It's not necessarily an innate trait. Yes, it might be in some people, but I think that you can be trained to become adaptable. And I'll tell you what, when I was younger, I did gymnastics. That was my sport. And gymnastics in those days was a mixture of, you had to do your compulsories, but you also had to do your freestyle exercises and all that, all the different apparatuses and whatnot. Now I'm 5'6". I'm not really big, which is the right height for a gymnast, and I have the right kind of body for that. But I had to learn that each of these events of each of these apparatus has its own way of doing things, and I had to learn to put them all together in order to be competitive. So this was what I mean by being trained, being taught to be adaptable. I did not went to the gym knowing what high bar was, what floor exercise was, or what parallel bars were. I that's what I had the coaches and the trainers to show me the way. And then in some areas, of course, I'm going to be better than others. But overall, if I wanted to be overall good, I had to be good at all of them. And I think that this is when parents in the Foreign Service, they can be the primary coaches and the primary mentors of their children. If they can model those behaviors clearly and articulately, I think the kids have really high chances of learning them and becoming also self-reliant. The problem is that when they see differentials in the kind of way in which the parents assimilate the issues, one parent may be feeling left out, one parent may be feeling abandoned by the situation, one parent may be left to deal with the moving while the other guy the other part of the couple goes to work. And then they see that resentment, that irritation that builds over time, that also translates for a child in anxiety, because it's like, why is it that mom or dad feels this way? Why can they both be happy? Why is not dad helping here now when we need him? Or mom, why is she not here when we need her? So now they're at work, they're putting all these long hours, and where are we in all this picture? What do we do? So if you don't provide children the appropriate resilience tools and mental development tools to be able to deal with these situations and to understand that these constant unexpected situations will be part of their lives, then they're going to suffer a great deal, because I cannot understand something if I don't have the tools to understand it. It's like if you're being tested in school for content that you were never taught. Say you're in grade, you're maybe in Form 1, let's use this British system, and you're going to be giving a test about advanced levels. Why can you do that? I mean, that's 10 years beyond you. Well, exactly. So we expose children to that level of stress and that level of load, of emotional overload, without the tools to address that, then it's going to be much more impactful on them, and it's going to leave lasting scars than if we are there and, like I said, we model those behaviors and we become primary coaches and mentors of our kids. If we don't do that, yes, it doesn't matter what support mechanisms we may have from the part of the employers. If the family unit does not really know how to navigate these issues as a family unit, definitely you're going to have this very difficult time with the children.
Now, do you think within the embassy and the government structures, do you have the integration courses that is given to the families?
Oh, no. Are you kidding me? No. I mean, the government is notoriously cheap. There's very little in the way of courses or this kind of thing. and maybe in the comments we'll get some employee saying, "Oh, it's not true. Go to our website." They give a kind of nonsense, one-size-fits-all approach to everybody. Thinking that everybody has the same kind of family or the type of circumstance, or thinking that if they give you, a few $100s for this or that, that's going to be enough for you to address very deep and structural issues. That if they give you, I don't know, $1,000, you're going to be able to realign your entire career and reinvent yourself, blah, blah, blah. I mean, no, there's a few flashes in the darkness of non-support, here and there, but there's never been a cohesive picture or a cohesive way of addressing the issues that the spouse and the family has to deal with in the Foreign Service. And this has been identified, by the way. The first Royal Commission on the Conditions in the Foreign Service was back in 1981. Pretty much the same recommendations they issued then are the same recommendations that the report on the Senate Standing Committee of Foreign Affairs issued in 2023. Okay, so 50 years on, the same fundamental structural issues remain, which means that the employee does not understand, is completely tone deaf or blind to the circumstances of spouses and family members overseas as they transition out and as they transition in. Because it's the two process, right? It's not just one or the other, it's back and forth. And while we're away, like we discussed previously, you and I, the countries are changing.
Yep.
They're moving forward. They will not come back to the same country than the one they left behind. And so some of the employees' families might have elderly parents they also have to deal with as they age. That's never been taken into account either. So, this idea that is some kind of static thing from the 1950s where, father knows best kind of nonsense is the template that they still used by and large by the Canadian government in dealing with the life of diplomat spouses and their families, for sure. I mean, the latest survey that the Canadian Diplomat Family Network put out, they did a really extensive report in 2024. 92% of the spouses report that they have no support from government structures or anything regarding employment matters, or when it comes to return to the country, it's like 85% or something, no support. It's like the government does not understand that there are very unique circumstances to people that are posted in the service of the country, by the way. These are not people that go into tourism or, to, become millionaires overseas. These are people on government salaries who are there because one or both members of the couple are public servants. They're there in the service of the country. Same way the military is deployed. Same way we are the UN were deployed. You are deployed. You're not sent there to, enjoy the sights. So that service component has never been acknowledged. I mean, they take the, lip service. Oh yeah, it's important, blah blah blah. And there's always the right demagogic speeches here and there, once in a while by some power that be. But the actual structural issues, no, those have remained to be addressed. And many of them go as far back, as I said, identified in 1981, and they're still not resolved today.
So that needs to be changed within the system, isn't it? Something more needed. Maybe that will help in the divorce cases, or maybe
the problem is that there's no accountability. If you're a high level bureaucrat in the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, which is actually the legal name of Global Affairs Canada, if you're a high level personal level, you're not accountable if things happen that unless they're absolutely related to the performance of the employee. All these things, which used to be called encumbrances, by the way, in the old days, family and spouses used to be encumbrances, like along with the furniture and all that. They don't consider that they're part of the remit. And because there are no built-in performance mechanisms into those people at the permanent secretary or deputy minister, as we call it, then they're not going to do anything unless there is a system that rewards and punishes the actions in regards to those areas, and that takes a political decision, of course, the situation will remain the same because they don't consider that to be a fundamental part or a part that has any impact on the performance of the employee. In their mind, these high-level mandarins do not see it, do not want to see it, are not interested. Many of them themselves are divorced once or twice or thrice, whatever. And so why would they care? What they will say is that, well, my second or third wife is getting along just fine. Yeah, that sort of optic. So in other words, that the personal life has to be the compensating mechanism for the failings of the employer. That will be maybe the way in which they think it is okay. Or some people have the view that you make the post is what you make of it. Yes, it is true to some extent, but no, the government is still there. The structures, archaic structures are still there. The unwielding procedure is still there. The indifference and the lack of understanding of the situation is still there. So no, it's not just the post. It's all this baggage that you bring into a post that is of a corporate nature, that is of a government nature in this case, and that's still there. So yeah, I can say I can make whatever I want of Singapore. Well, hang on here. There's all this baggage that I'm also bringing, and the employer is also making sure the baggage stays there, which is also going to, smother me and limit severely my ability to perform work. Just right here in Singapore, if you want to get an employment permit to work in the local market, naturally you need the permission of the local authorities. But to do that, you need to send like 3 letters to different parts of Ottawa. Nobody knows who's in charge. It takes 3, 4, 5, 6 months by the time you get somebody to reply to say, oh, okay, you can work. Then, of course, any local employer who was interested in hiring you no longer is interested. So this is just one example. And in many countries, that's the situation. So, yes, it is good to hear the speeches, and the right keywords are mentioned by time to time in the PR pronouncements that you get from the Mandarin Corps back in headquarters. But the reality here in the field is quite different, and it is again the unwillingness of the structures, the unwillingness to think differently, to get a little bit outside the box, the unwillingness to see that there are other consequences other than performance appraisals or what are you doing in your job that impact the life of the employee abroad. And that's a mindset ingrained. I think it's from the time when diplomats were also basically considered to be rich men who took diplomacy as a sport. Sure, like hunting or like going on safari, some kind of cultural safari. Well, that's long gone. And now it's just regular humans who do this kind of work. And us as regular humans, we have very different needs than those people way back in the day.
Well, with so many drawbacks coming up, like with family situations, how do you think then people would be willing to join the diplomacy and the public service positions, the jobs? If there's no solution soon found out for
It's not something that is being advertised. Right? When you get your offer of employment, they will tell you you're going to have to deal with all this crap, by the way. So, a lot of people just find out once they're on board. I don't have hard numbers on the people who leave within the first few years of their career, but I suspect there must be high numbers because there's always recruiting new foreign service officers. They wouldn't be recruiting constantly if the people were not leaving. So clearly something is not working to retain the personnel. Those of us who stayed, in my particular case, I can tell you with 100% certainty, is because I was able to reinvent myself within the range of my interests and my vocational service. I had been able to go outside of what I did before and to find something related or perhaps similar, and go to that area and perhaps do things from a different angle that I didn't do them before. So this is the kind of, back to the adaptability issue, how we deal with individual levels of stress. It doesn't mean that it's always nice. There's moments where we all have our moments of self-doubt, our moments of high stress as well, our moments of tension, where you're going to have the inevitable argument and fight at home and so on. I can imagine that people who have, two young children and have only one source of income, and that one source of income has to feed four mouths in a place like this, that might be a cause for concern, because it is a public service salary. And if that person is starting their career in a country like this, where the level of the cost of living is extraordinarily high, I'm quite sure that many arguments have been had over the dinner table about money not being sufficient, because it is a very, very expensive locale to live. So, these are part of the realities that you don't know until you are actually inside the service. And if we were to compare with the UN, for instance, the UN has the UN system schools. There's a whole bunch of measures that the UN put in place to support the level of employment spouses. Other countries like the US, for instance, they have priorities in which the spouses of serving diplomats, they get priority consideration for employers, the employment at the embassy. Their embassies are oftentimes quite large. So there is other countries, other organizations have a much wider variety of mechanisms to support that sort of adaptation. In our case, no, they're very limited. They're almost nothing, and the ones that are there are, like I said, that's that kind of a bit of a drop of water in a boiling pan. Okay, well, what difference does that make? So it's not really. There's nothing structural, nothing sustainable, nothing that prevents this kind of friction from taking place within the family units. And eventually, if the stresses are not manageable, then it leads to the breakup of the relationship. If people in the higher levels of the Department of Foreign Affairs, International Trade, think that that's the cost of doing business, I say that's a very narrow-minded and frankly stupid way of defining the role of the 21st century diplomat.
Well, it's just interesting to know all this insight behind the scenes.
Yeah, it is. And part of the reason I can do this is because, again, I can speak to you as someone who's been inside, and now I'm outside, and I've always been in and out all the time. And I have a different perspective. And look, of course, not everything is bad. It's a privilege to serve your country. It's a privilege to represent your country. It's like the Olympics. You go there and, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you represent your country. I'm quite proud of doing it. I think I've done a good job. But, that pride of service, that dignity, if you like, does not put food on your table, does not give you a career, does not make you a more adaptable person, does not help you with a lot of many multiple things that you have to do when you're leaving, when you're coming, when you're returning. So, let's not confuse things here. Let's not confuse the fact that people have a desire to serve, a vocation of service, to represent the country and to do it to the best of their abilities in the conditions that they're given. Let's not confuse that with the idea that that's a license to ignore those concerns, and that's a license not to do anything because, hey, we're always going to find someone who wants to work. Hey, no problem. Well, that's not how it works. Because again, I don't have the numbers, but I suspect that if you keep constantly looking for new hires to join, that means you're losing people along the way, and you're not losing them to retirement. You're clearly losing them at different points of their careers, and this has never been researched, of course. I don't think that the government has an interest in finding out to what extent family dislocations, family stresses, were the cause for an employee early departure or finishing their career, because of course that would not be in their interest to find out. But if somebody out there wants to do that research, I'm sure they'll find no shortage of people that they could contact, and no shortage of materials to understand and put into context. Again, let's not confuse the private service and the ethics that people have, because we do consider what we're doing important, and we do consider supporting our spouses also very important. Let's not confuse that willingness to put that on the line and to go to extraordinary lengths in some occasions to do that, then with the idea that that gives the employee a free pass, then it's like, you're there anyways, right? So why was it that they used to say in the old days, oh yeah, they didn't have what it takes when someone, left the service. Oh yeah, that's because they don't, or they had to terminate the posting for family reasons. Oh, that's because they don't have what it takes. Or, a post is what you make of it. Well, those are nice prefabricated phrases that are a nice PR cop-outs for an employee that doesn't know how to deal with the conditions of the Foreign Service as far back as 1981, and even more so now in 2025.